I'd like to ask you all to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance and the four-way test. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please join me in the four-way test. Of all the things we think or say or do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Now I'd like to ask Sam Johnston, Executive Director of the Colorado Press Association, for the Rotary blessing this morning.
Good morning. Dear universe, let us pray together, each of us according to our own individual beliefs. Let us offer thanks for our food, blessings for one another, and for absent friends. Let us be a source of hope for those in need and contentment for those who are lonely. Let us see the beauty in the world around us instead of rushing past it in our hurry to be important. Let us not be judgmental, as we all struggle, and everyone needs the kind words and helping hands. Let us give gratitude for our opportunity to serve Rotary. And if it's not asking too much, please let our Denver Broncos get to the Super Bowl. Amen.
Thank you, Sam. We are starting a new tradition of having a committee of the month, and I just wanted to announce that this month's committee is membership. I'd like to ask Brian Blankenberg, Senior Private Client Advisor and VP with Bank of the West, to give us this week's Secretary Report.
Good afternoon. For the announcements today, John Logan from Highlands Ranch Rotary is looking for Rotarians in Central Denver to host 5 water professionals from Kenya who are here on a vocational exchange. Dates needed are September 9th and September 17th through the 28th. Please see Jamie for more information and contact information. Just a reminder, we are just a week or two away from the garden party at Young Cho's. He already has 70 guests, so it's filling up quickly, so please make sure that you register if you plan on attending this cocktail and dinner at his place. Each week there are event updates on our slideshow during fellowship time, as well as the bi-weekly Keyway and social activities Friday blast, so please remember to check those out for any updates that are not announced on the podium here. We have quite a few guests today. We have a guest, Culver Vanderyacht, and he is the guest of Adam Yu, and he is in family law. Guest of Brian Geis is Chris Peters, and he is in wealth management. We have Katie Purcell, who is the daughter of Sandy Purcell, and she is a student at St. Mary's. We have a guest, John Lee of Jim Warner, and he is with doTERRA International. We have another guest that actually found us on Meetup, so some of our social marketing is working, and his name is Juan Valdez. We have Katie Stranyord. She is the guest of Alison Clark-Hardesty, and she is in personal training. And then lastly, we have Julie Hill, and she is the guest of Grant Wilkins, and she is on the Governor's Council on Healthy and Active Living, and she is in the health and wellness coaching field. Thank you. We have one visiting Rotarian, and his name is Trip Butler, and he is here from Breckenridge. So on the first day of school, a first grade teacher explains to her class that she's a Steelers fan. She asks her students to raise their hand if they too are Steelers fans. Wanting to impress the teacher, everyone in the class raises their hand and except one little girl. The teacher looks at the girl with surprise and says, "Jeannie, why didn't you raise your hand?" "Because I'm not a Steelers fan," she replied. The teacher, still shocked, asked, well, if you're not a Steelers fan, then who are you a fan of? I'm a Broncos fan, she says proudly. The teacher could not believe her ears. Janie, please tell us why you're a Broncos fan, she says, because my mom is a Broncos fan. My dad is a Broncos fan, so I'm a Broncos fan too. Well, said the teacher in obviously annoyed tone, that is no reason to be a Broncos fan. We don't have to be just like your parents all the time. What if your mom was an idiot and your dad was a moron? What would you be then? Then, Janie replied, I'd be a Steelers fan. And our quote for the day, the trouble with our time is that the future is not what it used to be. And that's from Paul Valeri. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Great job as always. Next, I'd like to invite Mark Donovan to the stage to give us our membership moment.
Thanks, Alison. Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. Surveys show that the most effective recruiting strategy is simple. It's to be invited by another Rotarian. Our mission as Rotarians is to strengthen and grow Club 31 by inviting our friends. This is up to you. The time to recruit is now. Since the one and only mission of your membership committee is to make your recruiting as simple as can be, one might ask, where do I find these membership committee members who are here to help me? We now have on our badges these helpful blue ribbons that read Welcome Rotarians, and I want to explain why we say Welcome Rotarians. We firmly believe that the guests and potential members that you invite to our meetings are already Rotarians. They just haven't joined yet. We help you introduce our club and its incredible opportunities by echoing your welcome. Membership team members are scattered throughout the room. Would you wave, please, if you're on membership team? Keep waving, keep waving. Good. We are everywhere. We're always at that back table when you have a guest, when you're thinking about a guest, when you have questions, especially if you're a red badge member. For heaven's sakes, find us. We always spot the red badge people. Now, turnabout is fair play. You can spot us. Recruiting is up to you. The time to recruit is now. Use the blue ribbons of the membership team to make your recruiting as simple as can be. Thank you.
In support of Mark's team, this week at our board meeting, every board member has committed to get one new member to our club this year, and we will be measuring our performance. So the board is in full support of Mark Donovan and team. Next, I'd like to invite Dale Harris, Senior of Counsel with Davis, Graham, and Stubbs, LLP, for Bob Harry's memorial resolution.
Fellow Rotarians and guests, we pause today in memory of our friend and fellow Rotarian, Bob Harry, Robert H. Harry. Bob passed away on June 25th, 2013, just a few days short of his 95th birthday. Bob joined Denver Rotary on May 18th, 1961, and faithfully attended our meetings for almost 50 years until his declining health kept him from coming downtown on a regular basis. He was a Paul Harris Fellow and a Fellow of the Denver Rotary Club Foundation. Bob had a long career as one of Denver's finest trial lawyers, handling important and complex commercial litigation in state and federal courts. He received his undergraduate degree and his law school degree from Yale University, where he was a member of Phi Beta Kappa and editor of the Yale Law Journal. Following his graduation from Yale Law School, he joined the prestigious New York City law firm of Hughes, Hubbard & Reed, where he practiced law for several years. In 1952, his law school classmate, the legendary Byron Whizzer White, persuaded Bob to move to Denver to join the law firm Lewis, Grant & Davis, now known as Davis, Graham, and Stubbs. Bob was the first trial specialist at the firm and soon became one of a handful of go-to lawyers, trial lawyers, in what was then a small legal community in Denver. Bob remained a partner at Davis, Graham, and Stubbs and head of its trial group until his retirement in 1988. He will always be remembered as a mentor for young trial lawyers at the firm who took inspiration from his methods of trying cases and his commitment to professionalism, skill, and ethical behavior. Bob was elected to the American College of Trial Lawyers in 1965 and served on its Board of Regents for several years. He was a member of the American Bar Association Judiciary Committee from 1969 to 1973. In 2003, he left retirement at the request of the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals and devoted 3 years to establishing the 10th Circuit Historical Society, serving as its first president. Although his practice was largely devoted to handling cases for the commercial clients of our firm, one noteworthy departure happened in 1954 and 1955. Bob and 10 other Denver lawyers stepped up at that time on a pro bono basis to represent 7 members of the Communist Party who had been arrested by the FBI and charged with conspiring to teach the violent overthrow of the United States government. This was during the height of the McCarthy era, and the case made regular front-page headlines in the Denver newspapers. The Rocky Mountain News described the 2-month trial as one of the greatest trial dramas ever held in Colorado. When the jury returned its verdict, the headlines read, 7 Denver Reds found guilty. But the news said this about Bob and his colleagues. The trial has been one of which the whole free world can be proud. It is entirely right that the most prominent lawyers in the state stand guard over the legal rights of these defendants. Bob served in the Navy in World War II, saw action in the Battle of the Leyte Gulf aboard the aircraft carrier USS Kitkin Bay. The naval historian Samuel Eliot Morrison has called this the greatest naval battle of all time, and it marked the end of the Japanese naval dominance in the Pacific. Just last year, Bob and fellow Rotarian Les Volpe collaborated on publishing a book of Bob's personal recollections of that battle. Bob was married to Georgia Humphreys in April 1945, 2 months after they first met on a blind date. Together, they shared 67 loving years until her death in 2012. They had 1 daughter, Judy, 2 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. Bob's friends at Davis, Graham, and Stubbs remember him as a forceful, clear, and direct as a trial lawyer, and caring and supportive of the young lawyers who trained under him. He was extremely loyal, never sought the spotlight for himself, always gave credit where credit was due. He loved to travel with Georgia, was a faithful Broncos fan, and enjoyed relaxing with a good cigar and an occasional splash of Johnny Walker Black Label. He'll be missed by all who knew him. We express our deepest sympathy to his daughter, Judith H. Chrisman, son-in-law Frank Chrisman, grandchildren Diana Bailey and Hayden Chrisman, and great-grandchildren Georgia Page Bailey and Ashlyn Rose Bailey. Madam President, I move the adoption of this resolution by a standing vote of the members and others present.
Thank you so much. For those of you who have a script, I'm going to change the order around a little bit, and I'd like to have Brian Geis and Ed Crabtree join me on the stage. And while they're coming up here, I just wanted to let everybody know that Brian Hickel has resigned his membership in the board due to the fact that he is moving to Manhattan. And so Mike O'Connell has graciously agreed to serve out Brian's term and will be joining us on the board from August through June of 2015. And now I'd like to have Brian join me for a beach sale announcement.
Thanks, Allison. I'm bringing some good news. Regardless of what the Denver Post says, the peaches are coming. So even though there was 2 hard frosts and a lot of people on the western slope got hit hard, we were able to make arrangements to get at least the minimum number of peaches that we've gotten in past years. To tell you how hard it is, the Golden Club, it's been doing it for as long as we have, they're going to Utah for peaches. So we do have Colorado peaches coming to us. The 3 goals of the peach sale have always been member involvement in a quick and easy project with emphasis on new members, fellowship on pickup day when we can all work on a common goal, and raising funds for both the Denver Rotary Foundation and Rotary International. So the good news is we have Colorado peaches coming to us. The bad news is we're running out of time. So the Peach Committee is asking you to buy some peaches, sell some peaches, send some peaches, local delivery to the people that you like. And, then come on Saturday the 31st for a pancake breakfast. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Next, Ed is here to join us with an announcement of our family picnic at the 4 Mile House.
Thank you, Allison. All of you, please come to 4 Mile Historic Park next Thursday for the family picnic. Bring not only yourselves, your spouses, but bring children and grandchildren for gold panning. We'll be entertained by Doug and Will. It'll be a grand time, so we'll see all of you next Thursday at 4 Mile Historic Park. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to ask Grant Wilkins and Chris Hill to join me on stage. Chris is joining our club today as a new member.
Thanks very much, Alison. It's my pleasure today to introduce you to our newest member, Ambassador Chris Hill, who's the Dean of the Korbel School of International Studies at the University of Denver. Chris, by the way, is being sponsored as a member by Young Cho, our Rotarian of the Year last year, and past Denver Rotary Club's president last year, Jim McGibney, both good friends of his in the ambassadorial channels. Chris has spoke to this club about 6 months or so ago. Unfortunately, Marlene and I were out of town, so we didn't get to hear it. But I've heard him speak many, many times, including as recently as the week before last at Santa Fe, where he addressed the World Affairs Council. Of all the people I've known in my lifetime in the ambassadorial world, working for the U.S. State Department, Chris is the best speaker of any of them. He can answer questions without prejudice. He has humor in his talks. He knows what's going on, even though he's been retired from the ambassadorial corps for 3 years. He came to DU 2010 from being the ambassador to Iraq. And you can imagine what experiences he had in that job, today's world. But he's capable of talking about anything in the world affairs. And he's been an ambassador to Korea twice, Macedonia, Poland, Afghanistan, Iraq, as I just mentioned. So his experience is unlimited. And I won't take up any more of the time because what I'm really leading up to is, believe it or not, our speaker from the Denver Broncos spaced out today. He's not here. You're not going to get to hear about your favorite team and all the problems they have. But instead, you're going to get to hear one of the world's greatest speakers. I'm very, very proud to have he in our Rotary Club. He's going to be a wonderful representative of Rotary worldwide. He's already, in the last few months, spoken at Rotary conferences in different parts of the world. So he's very familiar with it. His wife, Julie, accompanies him everywhere he goes, and she is a prospective member of our club. They couldn't have better ambassadors, no matter if we look the world over. As you all know, starting way back in '78, Rotary International changed from having Rotary clubs do local community service work to our world community service projects around the world. And we've changed things drastically. We've almost gotten rid of polio. We're down to this far from the end. We've cut the lack of clean, safe water in half in the last 6 to 7 years. So our organization is doing some great things. But everything we do is destined to promote world peace and understanding. Well, your speaker today and our new member, Chris Hill, has been working on world peace and understanding all of his life through the U.S. Department of State. So please welcome our new member, Chris, and we'll hear one of the finest talks you've ever heard. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I was not aware that joining the Rotary Club meant that you get sandbagged with a speech 2 minutes ahead of time. So I thought, well, maybe I could talk to you about the Broncos. By the way, I'm not a Steeler fan, so we'll all be okay on that. But then I thought maybe the recruitment committee simply ought to get a hold of Von Miller and see if he'll do a 6-week stint as a Rotarian, since I suspect he's going to have some time. And my advice is charge him some very high dues. But I wish I could make a prediction about the Broncos. My sense is they kind of snuck up on people last year. And so the question will be, can they do it again this year? And I think a lot rides on the shoulder, the arm of Peyton Manning when he's not doing Oldsmobile ads. I hope he will be throwing the ball to some of those great wideouts that Denver has. Let me just say, Julie and I really do consider it a great pleasure, a great privilege, really, to be in Denver. Truly a dynamic city with an international perspective. And in nowhere is that international perspective more pronounced than it is here at the Rotary Club. So in terms of making this an even greater international city, I think the Rotary Club is the place to come and the place to belong. So I'm very honored to have been accepted here as a member of the Rotary Club. As Grant suggested, Julie and I have done a lot of traveling. And I gave a talk at a regional Rotary meeting in a place called Ohrid, Macedonia, where there were Turks, Greeks, Kosovars, Albanians, and a few Macedonians. And none of them quite lived up to the spirit of the Rotary Club. And so I think there is work to be done out there. It's not that they didn't have a sense of service. It was the lack of a sense of tolerance, of listening to other people, that kind of worried me a little about the future of the Southeast European Rotary Club. So I hope that's the kind of place that we can think about to bring, I think, the message of that Rotarians bring all around the world and with such great success. So rather than talk about the AFC West this speech, I thought I might talk about what are the continuing problems out there. To be sure, and mentioning the Balkans, I don't put that on the top of a worry list. I wish people got along a little better between Greece and Macedonia. For those of you who don't know, the Greeks believe that the Macedonians have essentially engaged in an intellectual property rights heist by using the word Macedonian to describe their country. The problem is, of course, ancient Macedons, of whom Alexander the Great is the most famous, were a Hellenic people, that is, Greek people. The current Macedonians are a Slavic tribe that came in the 9th century, But if they didn't call themselves Macedonians, they really wouldn't know what to call themselves. I mean, Slavic tribe from the 9th century doesn't exactly sing. So they went with the place name, and since they're settled in Macedonia, they call themselves Macedonians. And the Greeks simply cannot seem to get over this, even though it's very much in Greece's interest that they help the little country north of them and help that little country be a better country than it is today. But that has not been apparent in Macedonia's 19 years of existence, and it certainly was not apparent at the Rotary Club meeting, where most of the Greeks actually boycotted the meeting. Notwithstanding that sort of hardy perennial of Southeastern or Balkan European history, and you always do have to remember that the supply of Balkan history, as I may have suggested already to some of you, exceeds the demand, and so I'm not sure people really want to hear about the Balkans anymore. But one thing I will say is that as a consequence of people like the late Ambassador Holbrooke, the Balkans are a much quieter, calmer place than it was back in 1994 and 1995. The Dayton Peace Accords, held in Dayton, Ohio, of all places. I'll never forget the reaction of the Serbian dictator, a guy named Slobodan Milosevic, to the news that the conference, the peace conference, was actually not going to be in New York City in Midtown Manhattan as he had hoped, but would rather be in Dayton, Ohio. Slobodan Milosevic had absolutely no idea where Dayton, Ohio was, and I remember Dick Holbrooke said to him, Mr. President, is a place where real Americans work and where you will find a real part of America. And in fact, 21 days and nights in the Dayton Peace Accords, with, I think, great American input, resulted in a much calmer, better Balkans, such that you rarely hear about it, except from people like me. So I think it's an example of the kinds of things that can be done when Americans really kind of put their minds to looking at these problems and trying to be helpful. One of the ways we were successful in the Balkans was to say to this terrible dictator Milosevic, yes, you'll be at the table. You'll be at the table along with other people. No, we're not looking for a way to punish you. We're trying to look for a way to have lasting political solutions in the Balkans, solutions such that we don't open the paper every day for the next 20 years and see some new bomb blast in the Balkans or something, as we used to in Sarajevo. Sarajevo was usually mortar attacks in the early 90s. And so that's kind of worked out. And as we survey what the contemporary scene looks like, we see a lot of kind of tough problems that, in my view, cry out for a greater American role. This is not to say that our role should be military. In fact, I'm an old-fashioned kind of guy, and I think that military intervention should be a last resort and not a first resort. But I think there is a concern right now that somehow the Americans have disengaged from the Middle East, and the combination of that concern that somehow we've disengaged, don't care as much, a combination of that and the Arab Spring, or Arab Thing, which resulted in I think, more pressure on the sort of, on the political setup, on the political framework in the Middle East than I think that framework can take. So these two things, I think, have resulted in a region that's in turmoil as never before. I think in the past we came to see the Middle East as a place bedeviled by something called the Arab-Israeli problem or the Israeli-Palestinian problem. But today we can see that is still out there, like the hardy perennial that it is. But we also have, I think, increasingly serious problems in Egypt and with a situation in Syria that is not only tending toward any kind of resolution, but in fact is widening and is affecting the rest of the Middle East. The complexity of these issues often exceeds people's interest in figuring out that complexity. it is not all about the United States. I would say the United States, the issue of what you think about America is probably the least of the issues there. But these things, the problems, the fissures, the fault lines there, I think go back many, many centuries in history. And so we have in the Arab world, for example, a division between Arabs who are, or between Arab Muslims who are Sunni and Arab Muslims who are Shia. Now, there are many other Muslims in the world. Indonesia is a country of over 200 million Muslims. But within the Arab world, they have tended to be mainly Sunni. And over next to the Arab world, you have the Iranian world, or Iran, and you have mainly Shia. And then kind of between the Arab world and Iran, you have a Shia majority country called Iraq. And when we went in there in 2003, we went in there to resolve one division, that is between those who wanted dictatorship and those who wanted democracy. And I think we made Iraq a more democratic place, but in no respect did we address a 1,300-year-old problem between Shia in Iraq, Shia majority in Iraq, and Sunni minority in Iraq. Iraq had been ruled by a Sunni minority for decades, even centuries, if you count the Sunni Ottoman Empire, because the Turks tend to be Sunni, about 80% Sunni. And so if you go back centuries, Iraq was essentially run by a minority. So we flipped that country to becoming a Shia-led country. And as a consequence, it had a somewhat better relationship with Iran than it had before. For example, Saddam Hussein had invaded Iran. The Sunni-led government of Iraq had invaded the Shia Iran. So that's not going to happen under the Shia in Iraq. But nonetheless, the problem is the rest of the Arab world, being Sunni-led, resents the fact that in their midst is now a Shia-led country, a country led by a Shia government. And so the Arab world, I think, has never quite come to accept what happened in Iraq by making it a democratic country. The majority, which is Shia, voted a Shia-led government. So if you consider that sort of ongoing problem and then look at what has happened in Syria, and what you see in Syria is there's, again, a minority government, but here the situation is flipped. You have the population of Syria is mainly Sunni, some 60-something% Sunni, and the government is drawn mainly from one tribe, which is kind of a Shia ally, called the Alawite tribe, which is under Bashir al-Assad. In fact, he and his father ruled Syria for some 40 years. So the Sunni majority in Syria are fighting a life and death struggle against the kind of Shia majority government. Shia in Iraq would like to help the Shia minority government in Syria, even though Iraqis don't necessarily like Shia, but they don't want another Sunni government next to them. The Iranians also want to help the Shia in Iraq, in Syria. So you have the Iraqi Shia wanting to help. You have the Iranian Shia wanting to help, that is, help Bashir al-Assad. And then on the other side of the equation, in this largely Sunni-led rebellion, you have every Sunni, many Islamicists, that is, people who feel very, very strongly about these issues, coming in. And so essentially you've got a problem which is becoming in Syria, which is engaging the whole Arab world, and including to some extent in Iran. So clearly the problem in Syria is not going to go away anytime soon. I don't think the Alawites, even with support from Iraqi Shia or from Iranian Shia, are going to be able to completely put down the Sunni rebellion, which has Sunnis from all over the Arab world participating in this in this rebellion. I don't think they're going to be able to put that rebellion down, nor do I think the rebels are going to be very successful in unseating Bashar al-Assad. So you have a situation that will eventually end, because all wars do eventually end, but it's looking more like a situation which will end through exhaustion. And so the question is, what should the U.S. role be? Now, a lot of people say, well, if we're not going to put in troops, let's give the rebels arms to fight against the government there. Well, that's understandable. After all, the government of Assad is probably one of the world's worst governments. There are reports, and I must emphasize nothing's been confirmed yet, but in the last 24 hours that they may have actually used chemical weapons against civilians. I mean, this is a heinous government. But when you give one side weapons and you don't have a sort of overall political plan for what they're supposed to do except shoot the other guys, I think you're asking for more violence. And so I think if we're going to be involved in Syria, we need to kind of take a deep breath and figure out what our interests are. If you have a Sunni-led government in Syria that simply has no interest in the plight or the future of the Alawites, who are these Shia Syrians, or who don't have an interest in the Christians in Syria, who've largely fought against the Sunnis alongside the Assad and the Alawites, or who don't have an interest in what the Kurds are doing. The Kurds have also fought alongside the government against the rebels. What are you going to create? So it's looking like it's going to be sort of long-term chaos. And if it were just chaos in Syria, maybe those of us who live in Denver don't need to worry about it. After all, it's in a small country far away. But the problem is we see this violence now very clearly spilling over into Iraq. Sunni groups in Iraq have been attacking Shia targets in Iraq with daily consistency in the last few months. Every day, if you open up a newspaper, you'll see sectarian violence in Iraq kills 47 or something. And if you've wondered what that's all about, that's Sunni violence where Sunnis who operate across the Iraq-Syrian border, who many of whom have come to Syria and ended up attacking Shia in Iraq. This is part of an overall Sunni-Shia conflict, which I think is very dangerous for our interests. So I think the United States, together with other countries, including Russia, which is a very difficult proposition these days, need to come to some understanding of what a future political arrangement should be in Syria. That is, should it be within its existing borders, or should they somehow carve it up and make a sort of Sunni part of Shia and a Sunni part of Syria and a Shia part of Syria? Should they do that? Should they? What kind of parliament structure should it have? Should the current president is an Alawite? Should a president always be an Alawite, or should it be a Sunni and then a prime minister position that is someone running the government? Should maybe be a Christian, or how can you kind of apportion this? Can this be done? I don't know at this point whether it can be done. A lot of people say it's too late. But to say it's too late suggests there's another outcome, and the only other outcome I can see is continued violence. So I think we're in a very dangerous spot there, and I think it's very important for our interests in the broader Middle East that the U.S. be more diplomatically engaged in Syria. And just when we thought the problem couldn't get any worse in the Middle East, that is with a metastasized Syrian violence, now we're seeing what has happened as a result of the Muslim Brotherhood government in Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood government barely won the elections. They were not only the best organized political party, they're probably the only organized political party in Egypt. Mr. Morsi made very little effort to reach out and talk to people who don't share the Muslim Brotherhood Islamicist view of the world. He was very cavalier about reaching out to him, probably because he had supporters in the Muslim Brotherhood who did not want him to be kind of playing ball with the Egyptians who do not believe in this kind of Islamicist vision of the world. So he ran a kind of 51% government as if it were 100% government. It didn't go over very well. The economy continued to weaken. And so at a certain point, about 6 weeks ago, the Egyptian military stepped in and staged what to most people with a pair of ears or anything else would understand is a coup. Now, of course, we don't want to call it a coup, because if you call it a coup, that triggers these kinds of doomsday machines in the Congress, namely that if you say a country has been taken over by a coup, that means automatically, according to law, that any assistance you've been giving that country, whether it's democracy assistance or how to grow peaches or something, any assistance has to be cut off. So the Obama administration has been very reluctant to call it a coup, but I don't think there's really another word for what General Sisi and his colleagues have done. So the question, for many Egyptians, this was a very good development. And to show the further complexity in the Middle East, where you essentially had these army generals, very secular, that is not Islamicist in any sense of the word, where they are trying to run the country against and arresting these Islamicists, you would expect some of the other more religiously oriented countries like Saudi Arabia or the Gulf states to be very supportive of the Muslim Brotherhood. After all, they're fellow Islamicists. But in fact, they're not. Because in Saudi Arabia, where there are many Islamicists, they have a completely different view of Islam than the Muslim Brotherhood. So you find the kind of irony now of some of the most sort of religiously oriented Arab governments supporting the military coup in Egypt. And you find very few of these governments supporting the Islamicists who are now either in hiding or fighting out on the streets. And by the way, while it's abhorrent to any American to see this kind of violence going on, if you live in Egypt and you know what the Egyptian army does, you know the Egyptian army is really not capable of kind of taking on these kinds of crowd control issues. And so this is pretty inevitable that you start getting hundreds and hundreds of people killed. So again, what are we going to do about it? If the United States tried to cut off its aid, which is mainly to the Egyptian government, to the Egyptian army, which happens to be the people now in charge, if we cut off the $1.4 billion that we give to them every year, and by the way, what is the composition of that? These are training packages. These are American equipment refurbishment packages. These are, for example, American armored personnel carriers that are upgraded to be more like contemporary armored personnel carriers. These are old M113s that get upgraded. So this is where the budget for this goes. So if you cut off $1.4 billion, the Egyptians won't see $1.4 billion less. They'll see some American equipment that didn't show up. But in the meantime, the Saudis are giving this new government some $8 billion and have pledged that if you Americans want to cut the $1.4 billion, we will make it up, because we know that Egypt is in a life or death struggle, and we know that the Egyptian government is not going to take a different view of things just because it's lost some American assistance. So if you're the Obama administration and you're being buffeted by all this gratuitous advice to say we need to cut off our assistance to Egypt, and you say, okay, well, if we cut off the assistance, then what? And then when you realize the then what means that they'll simply get more assistance from the Saudis, or possibly from the Russians, you sort of wonder as an Obama administration, well, why should we be doing that? I mean, how is that going to help our leverage in Egypt? And so you're very reluctant to do it, and for good reason. So I think we now are seeing a situation where the battle lines are clearly drawn, where I suspect My own view is that this plays out a few more months. The Egyptian military government is probably going to have the day. They're probably going to win. But winning means many thousands more people being killed, and often civilians, that is, people demonstrating in streets. And so I think it's going to be a very bloody time. And the question is, should the U.S. simply say, well, this is their business, not our business? And so I think it was very positive that we had our Deputy Secretary of State, Bill Burns, there trying to work with them last week, and I hope Bill will go back again. I think it's very important that the United States has a very robust diplomacy with other like-minded countries, whether in Europe or with the Russians or with the Arab League. I think it's very important that we manage to work this diplomatically. So I think if you're John Kerry and you've just had this success in getting the Arabs and the Israelis to sit down and have some discussions, that's the good news. The bad news is you've really got a triple header going right there. You've got a mess in Egypt and a mess in Syria, and chances are that you're not going to be able to get much momentum on the Israeli-Palestine issue such that you can really start addressing these other questions. So I think our Secretary of State is probably going to have to devote a lot more time to these other issues. Finally, let me just say that the U.S., I think, really has no chance at this point to somehow get away from the Arab world. We talk about the development of U.S. oil and how that could make Middle East oil less important than it was in the past. I think all that is true in the fullness of time, but for now, I think it is one of those problems in the world that we simply have to somehow be engaged in, if not militarily, certainly diplomatically. And for those people who think that somehow China is all set to take our place, you should have a little look at China these days. China is going through its own set of problems. China is going through weakening economic output. They are going through some fundamental questions about whether the political system they have there is appropriate to the modern economy they want there. And I think the Chinese, if asked if they want to take over world leadership at this point, would very politely and maybe not so politely decline. So whether we like it or not, we're it for the time being. And I think it behooves us to continue to take a view that our diplomacy is needed in the world, and we need to, I think, get on with it. So thank you very much.
Chris, thank you for many reasons. Number one, for joining our club. Number two, for being impromptu speaker. If you club had to rely on me to be your speaker, we would have had an exciting discourse about Excel data filters and nested if-then statements. So much better to have Christopher here. Thank you so much. The club will be making a donation to polio in your name. And I would like to invite you, Julie, Grant, and Marlene to be greeted by all of our Rotarians on the way out. Remember, next week is the picnic. Do not come here Thursday. No one will be here. Go Thursday night to our picnic. And also, Lonnie is all set up to take peach orders. So if you haven't gotten your peach order in, please see Lonnie and have a great week. We're adjourned.